Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today comes from our most recent Metis Strategy Digital Symposium. Enjoy. I'd like to welcome two great executives, Rob Lux, who is the Chief Operating Officer, a former CIO also of Cenlar. He actually was also the interim co-chief executive officer in the second half of last year. Looking forward to understanding more about that journey. And Mark Wassersug, the Chief Information Officer, also COO of Intercontinental Exchange. Rob, Mark, welcome. Great to see you both.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you.
Peter, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, Rob, why don't we begin with you? I first got to know you during your 7-year tenure as Chief Information Officer of Freddie Mac. You were there in the sort of aftermath of the Great Recession and some remarkable work that you did as CIO there, part of the executive team reporting to the CEO. You joined Cenlar in 2017, the leading mortgage subservicer in the United States, and rose to the COO post and even the interim chief executive officer post, as I mentioned before. This COO post, which you now have again, it's been an interesting combination of responsibilities. That is going from technologist to something more broad to run the operations. We're seeing this across a number of leaders, certainly a very small club that you're a member of, but one that's the door is opening a little bit further. And I'd love to get your impressions about that progression. You've confided in me on multiple occasions that your dream was to become the CIO as you were going through your career, places like EDS and IBM, on your way up the ladder of technology organizations. Obviously, a dream you had fulfilled. COO wasn't really actually on your roadmap. It's something that presented itself, and obviously a role you now occupy. Talk a bit about that transition to a new set of responsibilities that was not really one that you had on your roadmap.
I'm, to be honest, an accidental COO. I was not. This was not part of my career plan. It wasn't really part of the succession plan. But when the former COO departed, I got the call, and so I've got to say, it's definitely something where any CIO who moves up has to be willing to get outside their comfort zone by taking on that type of role. And, I'm still outside of my comfort zone, to be honest with you. I've been learning here for like 2 years and kind of drinking from the fire hose because like when I took on the role, it was late 2019. And then like 3 or 4 months later, March of 2020, the pandemic hit. And, as Mark and other folks in the industry know, a significant number of homeowners are impacted. The CARES Act, a lot of folks went on forbearance, and it totally changed the industry in terms of the amount of reg changes and so on. And so I was like learning while the whole industry was changing. And so, it really was exciting for me. In more ways than one. It was very exciting, right? But I think that the path of a CIO to a COO can be a natural path because, as a technologist, CIOs are lucky enough to see across the breadth of an organization. If you're in one area of the business, you tend to be looking vertically, within that function, whereas CIOs, they get calls from across the business areas and support functions, and they kind of look horizontally. So there's very few roles like that. CFO may be another one, right? That's probably why a lot of CFOs get promoted to be CEOs. But it's just something where I think you've got to be lucky enough that the timing's right, and you've got to be willing to take the leap. But honestly, I'd encourage people, if your aspiration is to be a COO or CEO, don't do it like me and be an accidental one. Think with the end in mind and build your career plan to make sure that you're prepared, because you don't want to be catching up like I had to do.
Let's talk a little bit briefly, if you don't mind, about that catch up, Rob. As a longtime CIO, what were some of the things that you needed to bolster in order to take on that broader set of responsibilities? Technology, I should, by the way, hasten to add, still reports to you. Your successor is CIO Steve Taylor. Reports into your organization. So technology is still part of your purview. What were some of the things you needed to add to that in order to be a successful COO?
Well, in the mortgage industry, especially in mortgage servicing, there isn't that much automation. I know ICE is doing a great job, Mark, to try to change that. But
Thanks,
I don't want to say that you can feel free to disagree with me. But I think mortgage servicing is ripe with opportunity. And so, of course, I come in like, all right, let's automate everything, right? But a lot of the different stakeholders in the process are not ready for that. So having to go back and identify, well, what are the processes that could get, could cause risk, could harm homeowners, and making sure that if there's not just a automation, a technology that can automate the risk out of that, that you've got to put in strong manual controls. There's all kinds of regs. I could spit out an alphabet of FDCPA, TCPA, SICRA, all these acronyms that go with this, but every one of them is important. The SICRA, for example, it's like, if you foreclose on a homeowner who's on active duty service, they're serving our country, and you take action against them, I mean, that's like, death. So we've got to make sure that we're buttoned up. And the thing I learned is, you can't just throw technology at everything. You've got to make sure that your processes are well defined and they're operating effectively. You don't want to automate a bad process. And then two, where you can automate, you've got to implement very, very strong controls, even if they're manual, to make sure the defect rate is as low as possible.
Mark, I want to turn over to you. What an interesting ride you have had at the at ICE. So you joined as the 50th employee back in 2001. You had 4 offices at the time and $20 million in revenue. Today is 11,000 employees, 55 offices, 40 acquisitions, 12 exchanges, 5 clearinghouses, an enormous data and analytics business as part of this. Revenues now in excess of $6 billion. What remarkable growth that has been. One of the things I'd love to ask you, as somebody who's actually been an operations leader before carrying the title, we'll get into the construct of the CIO set of responsibilities as they apply in your case, but somebody who's had operational responsibilities across a lot of this growth, how have you thought about staying ahead of that? What a luxury to have that you've got so much growth to grapple with. But I'm sure at times it must have felt like you were swimming against the tide, or that the water was starting to rise above your chin and above your mouth and nose. Talk a bit about managing that, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So every time you felt like that you actually understood what was going on around you, everything just changed, and you immediately had to get that other fire hose and start drinking from that other fire hose. It's been an incredible journey the last 21 years running operations at ICE, last 6 or 7 years as COO, and then picked up, as you said, CIO responsibilities. I like what Rob said. I was an accidental CIO when I started at ICE, because we didn't have a CIO, and the notion of having technology and operations different from each other in different groups was actually a misnomer. Look, we've always fashioned ourselves as a technology company that just happened to run an exchange or a clearinghouse or a data business on our technology. So the idea of operations and tech being disparate from a CIO/COO responsibility was just foreign to us altogether. I actually created the CIO role in 2021, so 20 years after we had really started, to actually be able to focus on some things. And we can talk about that later on. Mm-hmm. But in terms of staying ahead, look, our biggest advantage was being extraordinarily close to our customers. We came into the marketplace at a time when there was opportunity to actually launch transparency in the exchange space, in the derivative space. And our customers really gave us the blueprint for how to be successful there. So following up on what our customers were doing, we were able to immediately sort of identify opportunities and expand and capitalize on those opportunities. What I will say that we did an amazing job at ICE in terms of staying ahead is we did not get bogged down in analysis. We did not have to spend too much time sort of working through committees and doing a bunch of things. With a small organization, when 50, 100, 150 people, we could quickly make decisions. We weren't afraid to take risks in those decisions, and we were quick to implement. And by the way, we weren't expert at these decisions either. When we realized we had made a mistake, we were extraordinarily quick to pivot. So no love lost about who made the decision, what it was. It was turn the tables, let's go in a different direction. Let's all follow, sort of follow the leadership down to the next level. And I think, ultimately that really was beneficial to our overall success in being able to quickly take what our customers told us, implement new solutions and strategies, and execute quickly. The other thing I think we did a great job is that we weren't afraid of our egos at ICE in the early days, and even today. So we encourage debate, we encourage entrepreneurism, we encourage differing opinions, but when the rubber hit the road and we agreed to move forward, we all got behind whatever that one decision was. And ultimately, when you have all leadership engaged and ready to move forward on a common theme and a common philosophy, the power of the entire enterprise can really work at the advantage that way.
I mentioned in my introduction of you, Mark, that you've also managed 40 different acquisitions along the way. So part of the growth has been inorganic, if you will. That's pretty remarkable complexity to manage through as well. But with that number, no doubt you've got a sort of a playbook in thinking about how best to integrate acquired organizations into your own, so that the acquired and acquiring parts of the organization both continue to succeed, and that the transactions accretive as quickly as possible. Talk a bit about managing that as an operations leader.
Yeah, sure. Look, what we find is, and we've done acquisitions of 10 people to 3, 4, 5,000 people. We acquired the New York Stock Exchange in 2013. We've acquired Interactive Data Corporation in 2015, the New York Board of Trade. So many exchanges, clearinghouses, data companies, and then something in sort of Rob's world and now ICE's world, Ellie Mae in 2020, and we're in the middle of a very large potential acquisition of a company called Black Knight. So while they're all different in terms of size, scale, and scope, what we've learned, and we have a bit of a playbook, is that communication is paramount. Early communication is paramount in terms of the companies that you're in the acquisition phase for. Everybody's nervous about, am I going to have a job? What does this mean? What's going on? Being as transparent and as open with communications as possible about the why we are doing this, the what's going to happen, has been really beneficial to us. And to do that, from an IT and a CIO perspective, it's really bringing those corporate tools together, the Slacks of the world, the email communications, the phone systems, because once people can sort of see the knowledge base and understand the intranet and be able to communicate with peers across the enterprise, it brings that level of anxiety down pretty significantly. Not to say that it goes away, but that is paramount. The other thing that we believe in the playbook is we want to seed our culture throughout the organization. And what that means is get people who are long ICE, who've been at ICE for a while and who have expertise, go and work side by side with the newly acquired company, with people who are in operations teams, in development teams, because there's a lot of questions that a Zoom call is not going to answer, an email is not going to answer. But when you are working side by side with colleagues or your new colleagues, and you understand the culture and the way we at ICE think about things, it really helps in sort of solidifying a lot of that, a lot of the glue that is still flowing through the cracks at that point in time.
I have really great messages there. In some ways, you just make it simple, like focus on those things that are going to impact people the quickest, get over that anxiety. I love the way in which you frame that and the way in which clearly you've managed that across a lot of complexity. Rob, turning back to you, as I mentioned at the outset, for a good portion of the second half of last year, you were the interim co-CEO of Cenlar. And very, very interesting. I talk about a rare club that you joined for a time of CIOs becoming chief executive officers. I wonder, what did you learn from that set of experiences? This is, I know, an ambition for a lot of your former peers as chief information officers to rise ultimately to the biggest chair in the organization. From that experience that you had, what did it tell you about your background as a technology leader as an important ingredient? You mentioned the CIO and CFO for that matter, in terms of the advantages of the breadth of your network, your ecosystem inside of the organization, your understanding of processes from cradle to grave and so on. What are some other insights that you drew from that experience that perhaps have you concluding that this is a pathway that might be available to others as well?
I think it's definitely a pathway, especially for the future. I mean, the amount that technology drives, especially financial services businesses, I think you just see it becoming more and more of a path for people that desire that to be the end goal of their career. The it was kind of another situation where the CEO retired sooner than we expected. And so like I was kind of, thrust into the co-CEO role again. I obviously was familiar with the operation by that point, but Cenlar is also a federally chartered bank. And, what do I know about banking? I go to the bank branch every now and then, but, most of the time I'm not like, I haven't run a bank. Fortunately, my co-CEO, Jim Darris, he's been in banking his entire life. And he was gracious enough to like share a lot of his knowledge with me. I learned a lot about the other side of the business, which I had been, like I mentioned, drinking from the fire hose about servicing operations, servicing millions of borrowers, hundreds of clients. The banking side was always kind of this black box, right? And so becoming the co-CEO, I got to work with Jim, and Jim's now our full-time CEO, great guy. He really kind of took me under his wing and taught me about that side of the business. And, we kind of shared that. And like my job was to keep the operation technology running, but, he was in to help us, make sure the bank was buttoned up. But he didn't just say, well, I'll take this, you take that. He very much so talked to me and taught me a lot about the bank. And I'm still learning now about the bank, even though I'm back in the COO seat, because again, he's sharing that knowledge. Another thing I highlight though is, for folks that want to move beyond just the CIO role, take those risks, if someone says, even for a period of time, we want you to go over here and do something different. I would do it, if you're interested, if you have that curiosity. And, I guess I'm just naturally curious. So I always, unfortunately, raise my hand and sometimes get myself into trouble. But I think it really helps to broaden your knowledge. And now coming back to the COO seat, I have a much better appreciation for the business as a whole and how things link together.
And you talked a bit, we caught up recently where we talked about some of these same themes. And you mentioned the importance of developing a relationship with the board for the pathway that you've had, especially the most recent stops. Talk in brief, if you would, about the sanctity of that and how that's helped you along the way in achieving, both of the roles you've had beyond Chief Information Officer.
Yeah, exactly. That to me, and I think, Mark and others would agree that, a relationship with the board for any management is essential. And the thing is, the board directors, they come in, maybe if you're lucky, monthly, sometimes only quarterly. So it's your job as management to provide them with the right information and to distill it properly, right? So by that, I mean, speaking to them in bullet points, not paragraphs, giving them useful information in terms of, here's the key takeaway. We tend to board directors, unfortunately, a lot of times get dumped on in terms of you give them 1,000 pages because you didn't have the time to distill it. I once had a board director at another place who said, I want every slide to have the heading of what the topic is and a key takeaway in the footer. So I can just read heading, footer. In the middle, you can have all the graphs, all the information you want that support getting you from the header to the footer, but I need that. And it's like, oh, that sounds easy. It's not easy to put the key takeaway in a little footer at the bottom. The other thing is, I think that you need to, by establishing relationships, by that, when I was the CIO, I created a board technology group. It's an informal group of board directors that were interested in technology, but that has evolved into a technology committee. It's a formal technology committee now. And I think a lot of companies are shifting in that way to have formal technology committees that focus on innovation, security, et cetera. And you need to make sure that you're providing that information to those directors, both at the board meetings, but also informally. Having an informal relationship where you can call up a director, you can talk to them about any topic is, I think, paramount to making sure that you can progress in your career.
Let me just jump in real quick on that one.
Yeah.
So Rob, completely agree. And actually, I think you hit on a really great thing that we've done the last few years, where we had a technology, we had an operations, and we had the cyber committees focused enterprise-wide. And from a board perspective, we would actually do sort of lunch and learns with the board, because there's just not enough time in your board meetings, risk committee meetings and whatnot to really give the board members the foundational understanding of how things really work. And the benefit of doing that quarterly with our board members in terms of these educational programs was that at the actual board meetings, there was a much deeper understanding of really when we were throwing things down in the graphs and the PowerPoints, they actually understood the graphs as opposed to just looking at the headers and footers. And it made for much more meaningful, much more productive conversation. So highly encourage that. And I think the board members really respond well to those types of sort of additional carrots that you can give them.
I think you're spot on, Mark. In fact, next month, and I'll let you know how it turns out, hopefully well, we're actually having one of our board meetings in an operations center in New Jersey across the river here, where we're going to have the board directors sit with some of our call center folks for ride-alongs, where they plug in and they listen to some of our borrower calls and how they're handled and get a feel for how the operation works. It may be overkill, I don't know, but they've always expressed interest in like, well, how are we taking these calls and what are the homeowners calling about? And so, and we give them, to your point, all the stats and everything in the PowerPoints, but until you actually sit and listen to calls, you probably don't get a true feel for it.
Yeah, that's great. I love this thought of going granular, Rob. And Mark, thank you so much for weighing in also on the sanctity of taking the esoteric and making it more tangible for members of the board. But I want to return, Mark, to a remarkable aspect of your introductory remarks, which was even from the get-go, yours was an organization that didn't really see much of a separation between operations and technology. That's remarkably progressive thinking for an organization in the early part of this, of the 2000s. There are a lot of organizations that are struggling to get there today now, 22 years after you joined your organization. You mentioned how from the earliest days, it was thought of as a technology company that just happens to be involved in financial services, exchanges, et cetera. And so I can only imagine that sort of colored the way in which you all have thought about technology. In fact, to the point where your CIO role is in some ways almost like a misnomer. I wonder if you could take a quick moment and, number one, describe your purview, and number two, what's in the title? Why take on the CIO role at this stage, or at the point at which you did some months ago?
The COO role at ICE was very technology operationally focused. Again, they were married together. What we found was, and I'll be specific to the New York Stock Exchange and our listed companies. So there's an environment of an ecosystem of 2,400 listed companies that make up 2,400 plus listed companies that make up the New York Stock Exchange. These are all partners of ICE and of NYSE. And what we found was with 20 some odd years of technology and operations experience, we actually knew some things. And we knew some things that our ecosystem, the NYSE listed companies, might find some value in. So we're traditionally the COO and the CIO role, we're much more internally focused. I was looking to really expand the remit of the title of the role to now take that to almost an external perspective. So really work closely with our customers, our listed partners, to work through some of the expertise and the understanding that we had with small tech, with medium tech, with large tech, with operational practices, to really look at that as a consultancy for the NYSE listed environment. So while the title changed slightly, the perspective was taking the expertise that we had as ICE, understanding technology and operations, and really just focusing it externally to help our listed companies. So ultimately, it's the same job, but it's a much, much larger role and much more interesting, because now we've got touch to not just what's happening in the exchange business of financial services, but a much broader list of products and services that really benefit our entire ecosystem.
That's really fantastic. Well, Rob, Mark, thank you both for sharing some perspectives of the remarkable pathways each of you have had in different organizations, and the remarkable purviews you've had, the influence you've had in the organizations you've been a part of. Surely these are really aspirational journeys for many. I'm sure you're inspiring others to walk in your footsteps. So thank you for sharing a bit about the path that you've hewn that others might follow. Great to speak with you both.
You too, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you so much.